I was merely an afterthought shoved next to the catering carts, choking back tears as my son ignored me on his wedding day. But then his gaze froze on the silver logo stamped on the cart beside my elbow. His glass slipped, shattering on the floor. He thought this was the happiest day of his life, but it was actually the last day he would ever believe I was just a helpless old woman. My name is Marjorie Hale. 68 years on this earth. Hair cut in a sensible silver bob that Harper always said made me look severe, and wearing a dress that cost more than the floral arrangements. Yet here I was. I was sitting at table 18. To anyone else, it was just a number on a place card. To me, it was a calculated exile. Table 18 was jammed right up against the swinging double doors of the kitchen at the Halleridge Grand in Denver, the sort of seat usually reserved for the distant cousin no one actually wanted to invite. Every 30 seconds. My chair vibrated. It was the rhythm of the catering staff slamming their heavy carts against the doorframe, rushing to feed the 300 guests who actually mattered. The tablecloth in front of me had a faint, dried smear of cranberry reduction on the hem, likely a casualty from a waiter squeezing past to get to the main floor. I looked out across the sea of heads to the center of the ballroom. There, under the crystal teardrops of the massive chandelier, sat the Lowells, my new in-laws, laughing and clinking glasses in the prime real estate, basking in the golden light while I sat in the shadows of the service entrance. The noise back here was different. Out there. It was the sophisticated clatter of silverware on fine china and the smooth jazz of a live band paid for with money my son did not have. Back here. It was the hissed instructions of the banquet captain and the metallic rattle of dirty dishes being cleared. I sat in a bubble of isolation, surrounded by people who were technically family, but looked at me like I was a smudge on a pristine window. The laughter from the bride's side felt shrill, performative, echoing off the high ceilings. Then the music swelled. The double doors on the far side of the room swung open. Harper, radiant in silk and malice, linked her arm through Daniel's. My son. The room surged to its feet in a wave of applause. I remained seated. My knuckles were white as I strangled the stem of my water glass. A smile was plastered on my face, a rigid, ceramic thing that threatened to crack if I breathed too deeply. Inside, the mother in me was screaming in agony, but the businesswoman in me, the one they thought was dead, was turning to ice. A waiter pushed a heavy stainless steel cart right past my shoulder to collect empty glasses. The movement caught Daniel's eye as he walked down the aisle. He looked over, past the adoring faces, toward the kitchen shadows. That was when he saw it. Stenciled in bold, matte black letters on the side of the cart was the logo Silverline Catering and Security. He stopped. It was a micropause, a stutter in his stride that made Harper frown and tug sharply at his elbow. I watched the colour drain from his face, leaving him looking like unbaked dough. He knew that font. He knew that name. For years. Daniel believed Silverline Hospitality Group was history, a legacy I had sold off to retire into harmless obscurity. He thought I was toothless. Seeing that name here, at his wedding, on the very carts serving his guests, must have felt like seeing a ghost. It was a subsidiary he thought had vanished, representing a power he thought I had lost. His eyes darted from the cart to the table next to it. To me. I did not wave. I did not blow a kiss. I simply raised my glass of water in a silent, mocking toast. He looked at the logo, then back at me, sitting calmly in the worst seat in the house, right next to the evidence of his ignorance. The realization hit him with physical force. The champagne flute in his hand trembled violently, sending a splash of gold liquid over the rim and onto his cuff. Phase 1 is finished, I thought, watching the fear bloom in his eyes. Phase 2 begins the moment that tremor started in his hand, without him understanding why. He tried to compose himself, forced a smile for the photographer, and kept walking. But his gait was stiff. He thought today was the day he and his new wife secured their future. He had no idea that this was not a wedding. It was a harvest. And I had spent 9 months weaving the net that was currently closing around their throats. It began 9 months ago, on a crisp Tuesday afternoon in October. Daniel called me, his voice pitched a little too high, vibrating with a frantic sort of cheerfulness that he always used when he was trying to sell me something. He asked if I would help organize his wedding. He said he wanted my expertise, my touch. But I did not hear a son asking for his mother's blessing. I heard a man backed into a corner, looking for a trapdoor. They forget who I am. They see an old woman who tends to her rose garden and watches daytime television. They forget that for 40 years. I was the CEO of Silverline Hospitality Group. My business was not just fluffing pillows and serving hors d'oeuvres. It was logistics, contracts, and high-level event security. My specialty was internal fraud investigation. I spent 4 decades hunting down embezzlement schemes, spotting ghost employees, and tracing diverted funds. I know what desperation looks like on a balance sheet. I suppose I am partly to blame for Daniel's weakness. After his father died, I poured everything into him. I cushioned every fall. I paid his way until he was well past 30. 3 times I cleared his credit card debt. Once, I wrote a check to settle the liabilities of a coffee shop business he ran into the ground within 6 months. He used to be a kind boy, sensitive and eager to please. But over time, that sensitivity curdled into a fragile vanity. He became a man who needed to look successful rather than be successful. He got sucked into the world of online sports betting and cryptocurrency schemes, always chasing the big win, always believing that if he fell, I would be there with the net. Then there was Harper. She is a sharp girl, a marketing specialist at Bright Haven events. She always treated me with a patronizing sweetness, often making snide remarks about how Silverline was a dinosaur in the industry, calling my methods old-fashioned and obsolete. She came from a middle-class family that projected an image of stability. But my background check revealed a different story. The Lowells were drowning in bad debt and facing a looming civil lawsuit regarding a property dispute. When Daniel asked for help with the wedding, I did not just look at venue options. I looked at his financials. What I found was not just poor budgeting, it was a catastrophe. Daniel was in the hole for over $200,000 to a private equity fund based in Las Vegas. In my line of work, we know that private equity fund is just a polite term for a loan shark organization. As for Harper, she was quietly siphoning money from Bright Haven's marketing budget to cover minimum payments on 5 different credit cards. I sat at my dining table, not as a mother, but as an auditor. I laid out the printouts of their bank statements and communication logs. I saw the pattern immediately. It is the same pattern I have seen in a dozen corporate takedowns. There were circular money transfers, fake consulting contracts, and emails using identical persuasive language. They were all moving pieces on a board, and all the arrows pointed toward one single asset, me. They did not know that I was already 2 steps ahead. Years ago, I moved all my significant assets, the real bulk of the wealth generated from the sale of Silverline's major holdings, into the Hale Legacy Trust. The primary beneficiary is not Daniel. It never was. I did this to protect my husband's legacy and my life's work from exactly this kind of predatory incompetence. The house I live in and the modest pension account they think is my fortune are merely the bait. I closed the file folder that afternoon and stared out the window. I do not just see people, I see patterns. And the pattern of my son's life stated clearly that he was being led by the nose, and the entire pack of them was preparing to bite into my neck. The call that sealed their fate came a week later. Daniel, sounding breathless and overly affectionate, pitched the idea of a fairy tale wedding. He circled the point for 10 minutes before landing on the request he needed me to co-sign a few minor vendor contracts for the venue and catering. "Harper just wants everything to be perfect," he said. "And you know how vendors are with deposits." I saw the contradiction immediately. Harper had spent years sneering at my career, calling my former company a relic. Yet here was Daniel, nudging me to use my old connections to secure a better rate. They did not want my expertise. They wanted my liability. They wanted my name on the dotted line so that when the bills came due, the debt collectors would come for me, not them. I played my part perfectly. I let my voice waver. I complained about my arthritis and my fading memory. I reminded him, with a deliberate tremor in my tone, that I had sold all my shares in Silverline years ago to fund a quiet retirement. I don't have that kind of pull anymore. Danny. I lied. I needed them to believe I was a toothless lioness, guarding nothing but a dusty cave. I needed them to think the only things left to take were my house and my dignity. The moment I hung up, the tremor vanished. I dialed Robert Lang, my attorney of 30 years, and the trustee of the Hale Legacy Trust. "Robert," I said, "we are going to run an operation. I want a plan that doesn't just protect my assets. I want a precedent. I want to build a trap so airtight it could protect every vulnerable senior in this country." We moved fast. I quietly acquired a struggling boutique catering firm through a shell company. I rebranded it immediately to Silverline Catering and Security, structuring it as an independent entity, completely separate from the main conglomerate my son thought I had left. It was a legal firewall. Then, I called Daniel back with good news. I told him I had found a vendor willing to give them a friends and family discount. I would cover the entire catering bill as my gift. He and Harper were ecstatic, thinking they had scored a massive freebie from some desperate startup. They had no idea they had just invited the wolf into the sheep pen. Buried deep within the service agreement, which Harper signed without reading because she was too busy picking out napkin colours, was a clause Robert and I had drafted with surgical precision. It authorised the catering company to install independent security monitoring for liability and asset protection purposes, with all data stored on Silverline's private encrypted servers. By signing that contract, they legally consented to being recorded at their own reception. While they were busy tasting cakes, my private investigators were busy digging into the Lowells. The report was damning. Harper's parents had just restructured a mountain of debt in Arizona. More chilling was the search history on Harper's laptop. She had been researching guardianship for incapacitated seniors and power of attorney override procedures. They were not just planning a wedding, they were planning a takeover. They wanted to declare me incompetent and seize control of my accounts. I sat in my study, reading the report under the glow of my desk lamp. A lesser woman might have confronted them. A weaker mother might have cried. I did neither. I decided I would not block their path. Instead, I would unlock the gate and hold it open for them. I would invite them in. But every word they spoke, Every lie they told, and every drop of wine they drank would be recorded. If they wanted a show, I would give them one they would never forget. 1 month before the wedding, I did something that my lawyer Robert called madness, but I called a necessary diagnostic. I sat at my computer and authorized a wire transfer of $200,000 from an untraceable offshore account directly to the private equity firm in Las Vegas that held Daniel's debt. I paid it off. Every single cent. I did not tell Daniel. I did not tell Harper. To them, the debt was still a terrifying weight crushing their chests. This was the final test. I wanted to see what my son would do when the knife was no longer at his throat. If he found out the debt was cleared, would he fall to his knees in relief and call off this scheme? Or was the corruption so deep that he would continue with the plan just to secure the extra money I gave him 30 days to show me who he really was? The answer came in the form of silence and continued deceit. In the weeks leading up to the ceremony, Harper was the picture of the doting daughter-in-law. She brought me herbal tea and complimented my garden. But the moment I turned my back, her demeanor shifted into something reptilian. I watched her huddled with her parents, the Lowells, whispering about power of attorney documents and checking the surrender value of life insurance policies I did not even know they had researched. Daniel was worse. He avoided me, always claiming to be buried in work. When he did visit, he would pat my hand with a sweaty palm and promise that he was on the verge of a massive business deal. He said he would treat me to a luxury vacation and pay off my mortgage after the wedding. It was a clumsy, painful lie. He was trying to justify the theft he was about to commit, telling himself that he would pay me back with the very money he was stealing from me. The clarity of their intent became undeniable a week before the date. I was in the kitchen making coffee when I heard Harper on the phone in the living room. She thought I was out in the garden. She was laughing with a friend, her voice sharp and dismissive. She said, "We just need to keep her happy for the signing. Once the papers are filed, we will have that house on the market in 3 or 4 months. She won't even know what hit her." I went for my annual physical the next day. The doctor told me I was in excellent health for a woman of 68, though he noted my blood pressure was spiking. He asked if I was under stress. I told him I was just finishing up a complex project. I did not tell him that this was the final investigation of my career, and the subject was my own flesh and blood. I proceeded to lock down the arena. I signed the final agreements with the Halleridge Grand and Silverline Catering and Security. We established a secure perimeter. I authorized a dedicated staff tunnel, a hidden security room, and a direct fiber optic data link to a monitoring center in the office building across the street. Every angle would be covered. Robert finalized the legal armor. The Hale Legacy Trust was sealed. The assets were untouchable. The primary beneficiary was not Daniel, nor any grandchild Harper might produce. It was the Harborlight Children's Health Foundation. Daniel would inherit nothing but the consequences of his choices. The night before the wedding, I sat in my living room in the dark. I held a framed photograph of Daniel when he was 8 years old. He was wearing his oversized baseball uniform, clutching a plastic trophy. His face streaked with tears because he had scraped his knee sliding into home plate. I remembered how he used to run to me for protection, how he used to trust me to make the world safe. I stared at that innocent face and tried to understand the alchemy that turns a sweet boy into a man who discusses putting his mother in a nursing home to facilitate a bank transfer. I placed the photo face down on the table. The morning was over. The trial was about to begin. The reception hall at the Halleridge Grand was a study in curated perfection, the kind of scene designed specifically for social media validation. There was a flower wall made of thousands of imported white roses, a sleek photo booth with funny props that weren't actually funny, and a custom hashtag plastered on every surface. It was sanitized, expensive, and utterly soulless. The air smelled of expensive perfume and the metallic tang of ambition. Guests swarmed the check-in table, their laughter bright and brittle, checking their phones to ensure the lighting was flattering before they even stepped fully into the room. I arrived early, wearing my dark navy dress, standing tall despite the ache in my lower back. A hostess, barely 20 years old and clutching a tablet like a shield, hesitated when she saw my name. She did not lead me to the front. She walked me past the family tables, past the colleagues, past the college friends, all the way to table 18. It was the last table, wedged into the corner right next to the service entrance and the stack of high chairs. It was not an oversight. It was a strategic placement to ensure I would not be in the background of the official wedding video. Harper spotted me almost immediately. She glided over, her lace train hissing against the carpet. Her eyes flicked to the empty chair beside me, and I saw a flash of genuine irritation. She was annoyed that I had come alone, that I hadn't brought a companion to balance out her seating chart visuals. To her, I was just an asymmetric element in her perfect composition. "I am so glad you made it, Marjorie," she said, leaning in for an air kiss that didn't graze my skin. "Thank you for everything, really." It was the sort of gratitude one offers a bank teller. Daniel was right behind her. He kissed my cheek, his lips cold. He turned to a group of his business partners standing nearby. "This is my mother," he said, his voice dropping an octave. "She is retired now, just enjoying her quiet life in her little house." He framed me as a harmless recluse, a relic of a bygone era who baked cookies and knew nothing of the world. But while they played their parts, I was observing the logistics. I noted the efficient, military-grade precision of the catering staff. They were my people. Silver Line agents in waiters' uniforms. I noted the small, dark lenses of the extra security cameras installed in the crown moulding. I saw the slight bulge in the floral centerpiece at the head table, hiding a high-fidelity directional microphone. They thought they were sitting at a wedding table. I knew they were sitting in an interrogation room. As I sipped my water, I overheard Harper's parents, the Lowells, whispering at the adjacent table. Mr. Lowell leaned in, his face flushed with expensive scotch. "We need to lock down the appointment with the family attorney for Monday," he hissed. "Start the guardianship paperwork immediately. We can't risk her changing her mind or spending any of it." A distant niece, a girl I hadn't seen in 10 years, wandered back to my corner, looking confused. "Aunt Marjorie, why are you sitting all the way back here?" I smiled at her, a sharp, tight smile. "Because, my dear, when people assume you can no longer see clearly, every seat looks the same to them." She laughed nervously, not understanding the warning in my tone, and drifted away. A waiter pushed a heavy cart to a stop right next to my chair to unload a tray of appetizers. The black cloth covering the lower shelf was bunched up. Without looking at anyone, I casually reached out and smoothed the fabric down. The motion revealed the logo stamped on the steel panel of the cart, Silver Line Catering and Security. At that exact moment, Daniel was standing 10 feet away, raising a glass of champagne to toast a guest. He turned his head, his eyes sweeping past me. The lighting in the room was designed to be romantic, but it caught the steel of the cart perfectly. the logo reflected clearly in the curve of his crystal flute. I saw the recognition hit him. He froze. The smile slid off his face like oil. The master of ceremonies' voice boomed over the speakers, thanking the incredible generosity of the groom's family. But Daniel wasn't listening. He was staring at that cart, and then at me. I just sat there, smoothing a napkin on my lap. Harper sensed the shift. She squeezed his hand hard, her smile fixed, but her eyes darted around, suddenly realizing the air in the room had changed. The trap was not just set. The jaws were beginning to close. After the cake-cutting ceremony, a bridesmaid in a dusty rose dress tapped me on the shoulder. She leaned in close, whispering that Harper wanted me in the family room behind the stage for some private photos. She said Harper wanted a quiet moment, just mother and daughter, before the dancing started. It was a lie, of course. I could see the tension in the girl's neck, but I followed her anyway. I knew exactly where we were going. The room was not a lounge. It was a small, windowless conference room used for staff meetings. The walls were bare beige. On the center table, there were no flowers, only a stack of legal documents, a bottle of champagne, and 2 crystal flutes, high in the corner, unnoticed by everyone but me. A single red LED blinked rhythmically on the ceiling. It was a high-definition security camera I had authorized Silverline to install just yesterday. Harper, Daniel, and the Lowells walked in right behind me. The heavy door clicked shut, and the lock turned with a sinister finality. The atmosphere in the room shifted instantly. The warmth of the wedding reception vanished, replaced by the cold, sterile air of a boardroom execution. Harper did not smile. Her face was hard, her makeup looking less like enhancement and more like war paint. She started with the concern act. She told me that living alone in that big house was becoming dangerous for a woman of my age. She brought up the pills I had forgotten to take last week. I stayed silent. I did not tell her that I had intentionally skipped that dose and mentioned it to her just to see if she would weaponize it. She had taken the bait perfectly. Mr. Lowell stepped forward and slid a thick packet of papers across the table. He called it a temporary financial power of attorney. He spoke in a smooth, practiced tone, explaining that this would allow Daniel to help me manage my accounts and the property while my health was so clearly declining. He said it was just a precaution, a formality we should sign today while everyone was together. He told me to sign it for fun, as if surrendering my autonomy was a parlor game. I picked up the document and looked at Daniel. Then I asked the question that stripped the paint off the walls. I asked what would happen if I refused to sign. Harper dropped the act. She leaned over the table, her voice sharp and venomous. She told me that their lawyer already had a file ready for the probate court. They were prepared to file for emergency guardianship. They would cite my history of confusion. They would use my panic attacks against me. They would claim I was mentally unfit and force the court to give them control. I looked at my son. He could not even meet my eyes. He stared at his polished shoes and mumbled the words that broke the last tether holding me to him. He told me that I only had the house and that I did not really need much else. He said he was only trying to protect me. That sentence was a dagger. He was not protecting me. He was justifying the theft of the mother who had saved him from ruin 6 times. I placed the pen down on the table and said no. Harper lost control. She slammed her hand onto the table, making the champagne glasses jump. She screamed that I was selfish. She ranted that they were drowning in debt because of this wedding and that I owed them this. She said I was holding out on them out of spite. Her face was twisted, ugly with entitlement and greed. In her rage, she grabbed the champagne bottle and poured a glass, the liquid spilling over her shaking hands. She shoved the flute toward my face, demanding I drink it to calm my nerves. When I pushed the glass away, she did not drop it. She threw it. It happened in slow motion. The heavy crystal flute flew from her hand and smashed into my cheekbone. The glass shattered on impact. I felt the sharp sting of the cut before the pain registered. Warm liquid ran down my face, dripping onto my collar. It was a mix of expensive vintage champagne and my own bright red blood. A deep gash opened on my cheek. I stood there, completely still, blood and wine soaking into my dress. While the camera in the corner recorded every single frame of their crime, the sensation of the glass shard was distinct, a cold, sharp intruder wedged into the flesh of my cheek. For a split second, there was no pain, only the dull impact of the crystal hitting the bone. Then the blood came, hot and fast, streaming down my jawline and soaking into the high collar of my navy dress. It smelled metallic, mixing with the cloying, yeasty scent of the expensive champagne. She slipped. Harper screamed, the lie erupting from her before the glass shards had even settled on the carpet. Oh my God! Her hand slipped. She hit herself. Daniel stood frozen, his mouth slightly open, looking from his screaming wife to his bleeding mother. He did not rush to help. He did not shout at her. He just stood there, paralyzed by his own cowardice and the sudden violence of the woman he had married. I did not move. I resisted the urge to pull the shard out or cover the wound. I kept my face turned slightly toward the corner of the room, ensuring the camera lens above had a clear, unobstructed view of the damage. I needed the blood to be visible. I needed the timestamp to correlate perfectly with the trajectory of her throw. Then, I turned and walked out. I did not run. I moved with a slow, deliberate cadence. When Daniel finally snapped out of his stupor and reached for my arm, I pulled away sharply. "Do not touch me," I said. My voice was low, but it stopped him dead in his tracks. I stepped into the hallway. A security guard gasped when he saw the red streak painting the side of my face. "Call an ambulance," I instructed him, my voice steady. Behind me, Harper was already performing for the gathering crowd of staff. "She has had too much to drink," she wailed, sounding convincingly distressed. "She tripped. Oh, poor Marjorie. She is so confused lately." At the local emergency room, the fluorescent lights hummed with a headache-inducing glare. The doctor, a young man with tired eyes, examined the wound with a frown. He told me it was a deep laceration that would require 5 stitches. "Take photos," I told him, gripping the side of the gurney. "Before you clean it up, I want the damage documented." "Ma'am, we usually just take the photos," I interrupted. "And in your official report, under the cause of injury, you will write exactly this: patient states daughter-in-law threw a champagne glass at her face." He looked at my grey hair, my tear-stained eyes, and the tremble in my hands, a tremble I was carefully manufacturing. "Are you sure you want that on record?" "Write it down," I whispered, letting a single tear track through the blood. When the hospital police officer arrived, I shifted gears. I became the fragile, overwhelmed grandmother. I stammered. I looked down at my lap, avoiding eye contact. "It was just a family misunderstanding," I said, my voice quavering. Tempers flared. "It is my son's wedding day. I do not want to ruin it. Please. I just want to go home." The officer nodded, sympathy written all over his face. He scribbled in his notebook, likely noting that the victim was uncooperative and citing family stress. It was exactly what I needed. He saw a woman too weak to fight, not a strategist laying a foundation. Robert arrived 20 minutes later, playing the role of the concerned family friend to perfection. He spoke to the officers in the hallway, his voice hushed and deferential. "Give her some time," he urged them. "She is in shock. Let us not push her for a decision tonight." The police left, convinced that the situation was a tragic domestic accident involving a confused old lady who was afraid of causing a scene. The moment the curtain was drawn around my bed, the trembling stopped. My spine straightened. I looked at Robert, my eyes dry and clear. "Get a copy of the full medical report, the high-resolution photos of the injury, and the intake notes," I ordered. "I am paying the bill in full, right now. Use my personal checkbook. Do not bill my insurance. I want a direct financial paper trail proving I incurred out-of-pocket costs due to their battery." "We could have her arrested tonight." "Marjorie," Robert said quietly, looking at the fresh stitches on my cheek. "Assault with a deadly weapon. The footage is clear. We could end this now." "No," I said. "If we arrest her now, they panic. They get a lawyer. They stop talking. If I walk away, they will think I retreated. They will think I am hiding in shame, terrified of them." I adjusted my blood-stained collar. "I want them to think they won. That is the only way they will be arrogant enough to try to break into my house tonight." We agreed on the next move. I would vanish. I would leave the hospital and go dark. This would leave a void for Harper and Daniel to fill with their lies about my drunkenness and dementia. Let them tell the police I was crazy. Let them dig the hole deeper with every false statement they made to law enforcement. I walked into the hospital bathroom and looked at myself in the mirror. The stitches were black and ugly against my pale, bruised skin. The wound throbbed, a dull, rhythmic ache. But as I stared at my reflection, I did not see a victim. I saw a judge. This was not just a wound. It was the red wax seal on the death warrant they had just signed for themselves. Robert and I sat in the unlit surveillance room on the 4th floor of the office building directly across from the Halleridge Grand. The room hummed with the low, steady drone of cooling fans and hard drives, while the guests across the street danced to the last songs of the night. We were surrounded by a wall of monitors displaying every angle of my son's betrayal in high definition. We watched the playback from the conference room first. The footage was crystal clear. We saw Harper's face contort with rage. We saw her arms snap forward. We heard the sickening crunch of the heavy crystal hitting my cheekbone, captured perfectly by the high-fidelity audio. Then we watched the aftermath. Daniel stood there like a statue, useless and mute, while the Lowells exchanged glances that were not filled with concern, but with calculation. They were not worried about my bleeding face. They were worried about the rug being stained. On the live feed from the ballroom, the atmosphere had deflated. The party was dying a slow, awkward death. Guests were huddled in small clusters, whispering behind their hands. The rumour mill was churning. I watched Harper move from group to group, dabbing at dry eyes with a napkin. The directional microphones picked up her voice clearly as she spoke to a confused cousin. She said that I was not myself lately, and that I had been mixing my medication with alcohol. She told them I had become violent and that they were terrified for my safety. She was planting the seeds of my insanity to cover her own brutality. Then came the police interview. The officers dispatched by the hospital had contacted hotel security. When they arrived at the venue, Harper met them in the lobby. She did not just lie, she performed. She told the officers that I had become hysterical, thrown the glass at the wall, and that a shard had bounced back to hit me. She painted a picture of a senile, uncontrollable woman. Daniel stood beside her, nodding vigorously. He added his own embellishments, telling the police that I had forgotten my wallet at the market 3 times last month and that I often wandered off. I leaned forward in my chair, my eyes cold. By giving that statement to law enforcement, they had just crossed the line from family drama into criminal territory. They were now on record filing a false police report. They were building their own prison cells, brick by brick. An hour later, the ballroom emptied. The exterior cameras caught the 4 of them in the parking lot. The argument was heated. Daniel was pacing, wringing his hands. The audio pickup in the parking garage was fainter, but we could hear him panic. He was terrified I would sue. He kept saying that I would never forgive this. Harper cut him off. She looked feral under the harsh sodium lights of the garage. She shouted that they had to finish it before I got home. She pulled out her phone and put it on speaker. They called a woman named Klein, a lawyer they had evidently kept on retainer. They instructed her to prepare an emergency guardianship filing for Monday morning. Their justification was that I had engaged in self-harm and fled medical care. Then came the pivot. Mr. Lowell suggested they go to my house immediately. He said they needed to secure my financial papers before I could destroy them or hide them. They were not going to check on a mother who had just been stitched up in an emergency room. They were going to raid her home to find bank account numbers and deeds. I looked at Robert. The blue light of the monitors reflected in his glasses. I nodded once. He pulled out his phone and sent a text message to Detective Miller and the private investigator we had on standby. We had less than an hour before they arrived at my doorstep. The trap was no longer theoretical. It was time to go home and welcome them to the crime scene. My suburban home looked abandoned from the street, with every window dark and the driveway empty. It was the picture of a quiet night in a respectable neighborhood. But 2 floors down, in a reinforced basement room that used to be a wine cellar, the air was electric with blue light. I sat in a swivel chair, flanked by Robert, a private investigator named Miller, and a forensic accountant named Ortiz. We were not watching television. We were watching the 4 split screens that fed live video from the motion-activated cameras hidden in my living room, hallway, and study. At 11:45 at night, the front door handle jiggled. Then came the scrape of a key I had given Daniel 10 years ago for emergencies. He pushed the door open. Harper and her parents, the Lowells, crowded in behind him. Immediately, they began their performance. "Mom!" Daniel called out, his voice loud enough to carry to the neighbors' houses. "Marjorie, we are so worried about you," Harper shouted, pitching her voice to sound frantic. They were establishing their alibi, creating a narrative of concerned family members checking on a confused old woman, unaware that the only audience that mattered was sitting 20 feet beneath their expensive shoes. They wasted no time. They bypassed the kitchen and the living room, heading straight for my study. On the monitor, I watched the grainy black and white footage of my sanctuary being violated. Harper moved with terrifying efficiency. She yanked open my filing cabinet, pulling out old ledgers and bank books, snapping photos of every page with her phone. Daniel stood by my desk, his hands shaking violently, but he still obeyed her commands. He opened my laptop and began trying passwords. "Try his birthday," Harper hissed. "Try the dog's name." They found the wall safe behind the painting of the seascape. Harper wanted to call a locksmith or find a drill, but Mr. Lowell shook his head. "That takes too long," he said, his voice tinny through the speakers. "Just use the account numbers you photographed. Log in to the online banking. We can transfer the funds to the new account right now. It is faster." Down in the basement, Ortiz leaned forward, her fingers flying across her keyboard. She was monitoring the login attempts on the bank's server side. "They are in," she whispered. "They are accessing the decoy savings account." I had left that account active with about $40,000 in it, enough to trigger their greed, but not enough to ruin me. "I am logging the IP address, the device ID, and the transaction attempt," Ortiz said. "The fraud algorithm is tagging it as we speak." On the screen above us, Harper was gloating. She turned the laptop screen toward Daniel. "I have a scan of her signature from that birthday card she sent us last year," she said, her voice dripping with triumph. "I just need to drag and drop it onto the electronic transfer form. A little Photoshop magic. And we are done. 15 minutes. And when she wakes up tomorrow, she will have nothing." I watched her finger hover over the trackpad, dragging the digital forgery onto the authorization line. I reached out and pressed the button for the house-wide intercom system. "You got the last stroke wrong." "Harper," I said, my voice booming through the speakers in the study, amplified and cold. "My real signature never curves up at the tail of the letter H." On the monitor, the reaction was instantaneous. They jumped as if they had been electrocuted. Harper slammed the laptop shut. Daniel spun around, his eyes wide and terrified, scanning the empty room. "Mom," he whispered to the air. They thought I had walked in through the front door. They scrambled into the hallway, heading for the exit. As they reached the foyer, Miller pressed a single red button on his console. A heavy, metallic thud echoed through the house as the electronic deadbolts on the front and back doors engaged. The steel pins slid into place, sealing the house tight. They were locked in. I stood up and smoothed my skirt. "It is time," I said. We walked up the basement stairs to the hallway bookshelf. Harper had always mocked this feature of the house, calling it my pretentious Hollywood affectation. I released the latch, hidden behind a copy of Great Expectations, and the entire bookcase swung outward silently. The four of them were huddled by the front door, frantically pulling at the handle. When the bookcase opened, they froze. They stared at me, then at the three grim-faced professionals standing behind me. I touched the white bandage on my cheek, where the blood had dried into a dark crust, and looked at my son. He was pale, sweating, and trapped. "Welcome to the crime scene," I said softly. "I believe you have already provided all the evidence we need." Miller and Ortiz stepped forward, the golden shields of their badges glinting under the hallway lights. Miller announced clearly that they were law enforcement officers and that the entire break-in, the attempted theft, and the conspiracy to commit wire fraud had been recorded and witnessed in real time. He began reciting the Miranda rights, his voice a heavy monotone that cut through the panic. Within seconds, Harper and her parents were pressed against the wall, the metallic click of handcuffs signaling the end of their scheme. Daniel collapsed to his knees. He crawled toward me, tears streaming down his face, begging for mercy. He sobbed that he had no choice, that the loan sharks were going to kill him, and that Harper forced him into it. He tried to grab the hem of my skirt, but I took a step back. I looked down at him, my expression completely void of maternal warmth, and delivered the blow that would hurt him more than prison. I told him that the debt in Las Vegas did not exist anymore. I revealed that I had paid the entire $200,000 myself, in full, 1 week ago. The color vanished from his face. He slumped against the floorboards, the realization crashing down on him. Everything he had done tonight, the lies, the theft, the betrayal, had not been a desperate act of survival. It had been nothing but naked greed and cowardice. He stammered, asking why I would do that and not tell him. I answered him simply. I said I did it to see what he would do with his very last chance at redemption. He had failed. Robert stepped forward then, opening the portable safe he had brought from the basement. He pulled out a yellowed document. It was the contract Daniel had signed 3 years ago when I bailed him out of his failed coffee business for $100,000. Robert reminded him of the clause on the last page. In exchange for that final bailout, Daniel had voluntarily waived all future rights to inherit anything from the Hale Legacy Trust. His signature was right there, bold and undeniable. Harper, despite the handcuffs, started screaming. She shrieked that she had rights to her husband's assets and that she would sue the estate until it was dry. Ortiz silenced her by reading the final clause of the trust. Upon my death, 100% of the assets would transfer immediately to the Harbor Light Children's Health Foundation. There was not a single line in the document for children or grandchildren. They were fighting over a vault that had been empty for them all along. The timeline jumped forward to a courtroom 4 months later. The proceedings were swift and brutal. The prosecutor did not need to say much. He simply played the video of Harper throwing the glass into my face and the audio recording of them in the parking lot plotting to put me in a nursing home to seize my accounts. The silence in the courtroom was suffocating. The judge sentenced Harper to 8 years in federal prison for aggravated assault, conspiracy to commit fraud, and identity theft. Her parents received 3 years each as accomplices. Daniel was given a separate sentence for conspiracy and filing a false police report. I sat in the back row, refusing the offer to give a victim impact statement. I had nothing left to say to them. The room felt heavy with the collective realization that my son had chosen to destroy his mother for a debt that had already been paid. I walked out of the courthouse and stood on the concrete steps. The autumn wind bit at my face, stinging the jagged pink scar that now ran across my cheekbone. A black van pulled up to the curb. The logo on the side reflected the grey sky, Silverline Catering and Security. I climbed into the back seat and looked at Robert. I told him to finalize the paperwork to transfer the majority of this year's dividends to the charity immediately. As the van pulled away into traffic, I looked out the window at the fading silhouette of the courthouse. I thought to myself that family is not defined by blood. Family consists of the people who do not force you to sit by the catering carts on the day they plan to sign away your life. Thank you so much for listening to my story. I would love to know where you folks are tuning in from. So please drop your city or country in the comments below so we can connect. If you enjoyed this story, please make sure to subscribe to Grandma's Family Diary, hit that like button, and smash the hype button to help this video reach even more people.